You don't belong in this cabin. Rachel Dawson's voice cut through first class like a blade, sharp, loud, and certain, the kind of voice that didn't ask questions. It delivered verdicts, and every head in rows 1 through 4 turned at once, as if the entire aircraft had just been pulled into a single moment of judgment at 38,000 feet, where silence usually meant comfort, not conflict. But today's silence felt different, heavy, electric, waiting to see what would happen next. And at the center of it all sat Ethan Cole, a black man in a plain charcoal t-shirt, dark jeans, and clean sneakers. No designer logos, no gold watch, nothing that screamed power, nothing that fit the image Rachel had already decided he should have if he truly belonged there. And yet his boarding pass, digitally scanned just minutes earlier, had glowed green without hesitation, confirming seat 2A, first class, paid in full, no flags, no issues, just fact. But facts didn't seem to matter anymore. Not in this moment. Not in this space where perception had already taken control of the narrative. Rachel stepped closer, her posture rigid, her expression tight with the kind of confidence that came from never being questioned. "Sir, I need you to gather your things and move to economy," she said, louder this time, making sure the surrounding passengers heard every word, a performance disguised as protocol. And somewhere behind her, a well-dressed white couple exchanged glances, one of them nodding subtly, as if this scene made sense to them, as if it confirmed something they already believed. Ethan didn't move, not an inch, not a flinch. He simply looked up at her, calm, steady, the kind of calm that didn't come from confusion but from recognition, because he had seen this before, not on this plane, not in this exact moment, but in 100 different versions over the past 20 years. From boardrooms where his ideas were ignored until repeated by someone else, to luxury hotels where his reservations were accidentally misplaced, to private clubs where membership somehow required an extra layer of scrutiny when he walked in, and now here, again, same script, different setting. Rachel crossed her arms, impatience creeping into her voice. "I'm not going to ask again," she said. And that's when Ethan finally spoke, his voice low, controlled, cutting through the tension without raising itself above it. "You already asked," he said, "and I already answered." A pause followed, not long, but long enough to shift the air in the cabin, long enough for a few passengers to lean forward, to sense that this wasn't going to unfold the way Rachel expected. And still, he didn't reach for his bag, didn't look around for support, didn't try to explain himself, because he didn't need to, not yet. Instead, he reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out his phone, not in panic, not in defense, but with the precision of someone initiating a process, a decision already made long before this moment began. And as his thumb hovered over the screen, Rachel let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Recording me isn't going to help you," she said. But Ethan didn't respond to her, not directly. His eyes remained steady, his posture unchanged, as he placed the phone to his ear and spoke just 5 words, quiet enough that only those closest could hear, but sharp enough to carry weight far beyond the cabin. "Start the clock. It's begun." The line went quiet for half a second after Ethan spoke, but the silence did not feel empty. It felt loaded, like something had just been set in motion beneath the surface of the plane, invisible but inevitable, and Rachel felt it even if she did not understand it, her jaw tightening as she glanced around at the watching passengers, now more alert than before, their curiosity shifting into something sharper, something closer to doubt. "Sir, I do not know who you think you are calling," she said, her tone tightening as she tried to regain control of the moment. "But this is not how this works." Ethan lowered the phone slowly, not ending the call, just letting it rest against his leg, as if whatever needed to be said had already been said. "You are right," he replied calmly. "This is not how it works." And that sentence landed differently, not defensive, not reactive, but declarative, like a quiet correction to a system that had already made its mistake. Rachel scoffed under her breath, and turned slightly toward the galley, signaling with her hand. And within seconds another crew member approached, a tall man with a pressed uniform and a practiced expression, Brian Keller, senior flight attendant, mid-30s, confident in the way someone is when they have never had to question their authority. "What is the issue?" he asked, though his eyes had already sized Ethan up before the answer came. Rachel did not hesitate. Seat dispute, she said. He is refusing to comply. Brian nodded once, stepping forward with a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. Sir, we are going to need you to move to your assigned cabin, he said, emphasizing the word assigned as if it settled everything. Ethan looked up at him, steady, unshaken. I am in my assigned cabin, he replied. And again, no raised voice, no tension in his tone, just fact. And somehow that made it more uncomfortable for the people standing over him. Because there was nothing to push against, no aggression to justify escalation, no attitude to point at. Just a man sitting exactly where he had been told to sit. A few rows back, a young flight attendant trainee named Noah Brooks stood frozen near the galley entrance, his tablet still in his hands, eyes flicking between the system display and the scene unfolding in front of him. He had scanned Ethan's boarding pass himself, watched it flash green, confirmed seat 2A, and now he felt something shift in his chest, not fear exactly, but awareness. The kind that comes when you realize the story being told in front of you does not match the truth you just witnessed. He took a small step forward, hesitant, almost stopping himself, then spoke, his voice quieter than the others but clear enough to be heard. I scanned his pass, he said. It was valid. Rachel turned sharply, her expression tightening. Noah, step back, she said quickly, too quickly, but the words had already landed. A ripple moving through the nearby passengers. One woman in row 3 lowering her magazine. Another man leaning into the aisle slightly. Listening more closely now, Brian's smile flickered, just for a second, before returning. System errors happen, he said smoothly. But even he sounded less certain than before. Ethan watched it all unfold without moving, his gaze calm, almost analytical, as if he had seen this exact moment play out before, just with different faces, different uniforms, same pattern, and then his phone vibrated once in his hand. A single notification, subtle, controlled. He glanced down at the screen briefly, then back up, and for the first time, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not a smile, not satisfaction, just recognition, like a clock had started somewhere far beyond this cabin and was now ticking steadily forward. Minute 1, he said quietly, almost to himself, but loud enough for Rachel to hear. And something in that simple phrase made her pause, just for a second, because for the first time since this started, it felt like she was no longer the one in control of what happened next. The air inside the cabin did not settle after that. It tightened, like every second that passed was pulling something invisible closer to the surface. And Rachel felt it now, not as confidence, but as pressure, the kind that creeps in when control starts to slip without warning. She crossed her arms again, but this time it was not authority, it was defense. This is unnecessary, she said sharply, glancing at Brian as if expecting him to restore order, but Brian did not speak right away, his eyes flicking briefly toward Noah, then toward the seated passengers, then back to Ethan, recalculating, because the situation had shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but enough. A man in row 2 leaned into the aisle, his voice low but firm. If his ticket is valid, why is he being moved? And that question did not sound like curiosity. It sounded like challenge. Rachel turned toward him quickly. Sir, please remain seated. This is a crew matter. But the man did not lean back, and neither did the woman across from him, who had now set her phone on her lap, recording without making it obvious. The cabin was no longer passive. It was watching, evaluating, and that changed everything. Noah swallowed, his grip tightening around his tablet, and before he could stop himself, he looked down at the system again, fingers moving faster this time, double-checking, confirming what he already knew. Seat 2A, Ethan Cole, confirmed, no flags, no changes, no reason for removal. His heart started to beat faster, not from fear of Ethan, but from the growing realization that what was happening in front of him did not match the data in his hands, and that gap was getting harder to ignore. Brian stepped slightly closer to Rachel, lowering his voice just enough to keep it from carrying. Are you sure about this? He muttered, and that question alone was enough to crack the image Rachel had been holding, because certainty had been her foundation, and now it was being questioned in front of witnesses. Of course I am. She replied quickly, too quickly, then reached for her service tablet, her fingers moving with sharp precision, pulling up the seat manifest, her eyes scanning, searching for confirmation. And then, something changed. Her expression tightened, just for a fraction of a second, almost invisible. But Ethan saw it, because he had been watching not her words, but her reactions, and reactions never lied. She turned the screen slightly away, shielding it, then tapped again, faster now, deliberate, controlled, and within seconds the display refreshed. The name on seat 2A flickered, then disappeared, replaced with a blank entry, a clean gap where data used to be, and Rachel exhaled, a quiet breath of relief. There, she said, turning the screen back toward Brian. No record. Brian leaned in, eyes narrowing, studying the screen, and for a moment he hesitated, because something about the timing did not sit right. But the evidence was in front of him, visible, simple, easy to accept, and easy to act on. He straightened, his voice firmer now. Sir, the system shows no valid assignment for this seat under your name, he said, the confidence returning, reinforced by the digital confirmation. You will need to relocate. Ethan did not respond immediately, his gaze shifting briefly to Noah, who was now staring at his own tablet, confusion written across his face, because what he saw did not match what Rachel was showing. And in that moment, something deeper clicked into place, not just a mistake, not just a misunderstanding, but a pattern, a decision, a choice, and Ethan understood it instantly. He had seen it before, systems adjusted, records altered, narratives rewritten to match assumptions, and each time it happened, it was justified the same way, quiet, procedural, invisible, but no less real. His phone vibrated again, a second notification, and this time when he looked down, there was no hesitation at all, just confirmation. The process was moving exactly as expected. He lifted his eyes slowly, meeting Rachel's gaze with a calm that now felt heavier than before, more deliberate, more anchored. Minute 3, he said, and the way he said it was different, not quiet anymore, not just for himself, but for everyone listening. And now they were all listening, because whatever this was, it was no longer just about a seat. The word 3 did not just mark time. It shifted the balance in the cabin, because now there was a rhythm to what was happening, something measurable, something moving forward whether anyone else understood it or not. And Rachel felt it in the way the passengers were no longer avoiding eye contact. They were watching directly now, openly, their expressions no longer neutral but questioning. And that made her voice sharper when she spoke again. Sir, I am not going to continue debating this with you, she said, her tone clipped, controlled, but thinner than before. You either move now or we escalate this. Ethan tilted his head slightly, not in defiance but in acknowledgement, as if she had just confirmed the next step he was expecting. You already escalated it, he replied, and the calm in his voice did not match the tension around him, which only made it more unsettling. Brian stepped forward again, trying to reclaim structure. If you do not comply, we will have to involve the captain, he said, and that word carried weight. It always did, because the captain meant authority beyond the cabin, beyond discussion, final. But before Ethan could respond, Noah spoke again, this time louder, clearer, the hesitation gone. That is not correct, he said, and the entire row turned toward him. Rachel's eyes snapped in his direction. Noah, enough, she said sharply. But he did not step back this time, his hands steady now even if his heart was not. I am looking at the system. Right now, he continued, lifting the tablet slightly. The original log shows his name. It never flagged. It never changed until just now. The words landed hard, because they were not emotional. They were factual, and facts had a way of cutting through noise when they were said out loud. Brian frowned, turning toward Rachel slowly. What is he talking about? He asked, and this time the question did not stay between them. It hung in the open air where everyone could hear it. Rachel's composure cracked for just a second, just enough to show the pressure building underneath. He is mistaken, she said quickly, but the speed of her answer worked against her, not for her, because it sounded rehearsed, not verified, and the woman in row 3 raised her phone slightly higher. Now, no longer hiding it, recording everything. You just changed it, she said under her breath, but loud enough for the man beside her to hear, and he nodded, eyes still fixed on the scene. The cabin had shifted again, not divided yet, but no longer unified under the crew's authority. Now it was split between what was being said and what people were starting to believe. Ethan remained seated, his posture unchanged, his gaze steady, but inside, something older stirred, a memory not from minutes ago but from years back, standing at a private terminal in Dallas, dressed almost exactly the same, being told his credentials needed additional verification, while others walked past without question, the same pause, the same doubt, the same quiet assumption that he did not match the image of where he was. And he remembered the decision he made that day, not to argue louder, not to prove himself faster, but to build something that would never require permission again. That memory passed through him like a shadow, quick but grounding. And when he looked up again, the present felt sharper, clearer. His phone vibrated once more, a third signal. And this time he did not even check it. He already knew what it meant. The process was no longer starting, it was advancing. Rachel took a step closer again, her voice now firm but edged with something new, urgency. "This is your final warning," she said. "Move, or you will be removed from this aircraft." Ethan met her gaze without hesitation, without emotion, and for a brief second, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the reaction, the argument, the resistance, but none came. Instead, he spoke in the same even tone, measured, precise. "You should stop," he said, and that sentence landed heavier than anything before it, because it was not a request, it was not advice, it was a statement, simple, direct, final. And for the first time since this began, Rachel did not respond immediately, because something in the way he said it made her hesitate, just enough to feel the ground shifting under her feet. That hesitation did not last long, but it was enough to change everything, because once doubt enters a moment like this, it spreads, quietly, quickly, and Rachel felt it in the way Brian did not immediately back her up this time. In the way the passengers were no longer waiting for instructions but forming opinions of their own, and that loss of control made her voice rise again, sharper, louder, trying to reclaim authority before it slipped further. "No," she said firmly, stepping closer into the aisle. "What needs to stop is this disruption." And she turned slightly, projecting her voice outward. "We have a non-compliant passenger refusing crew instructions." The words carried down the cabin, deliberate, chosen, designed to frame the situation in a way that restored power to her side. But the framing did not land the same anymore, not after what had already been seen and heard. The man in row 2 shook his head slightly. The woman with the phone did not lower it. And Noah stood still, no longer unsure, his silence now intentional, a refusal to support what he knew was not right. Brian exhaled slowly, his posture shifting as he made a decision, not fully stepping away from Rachel, but no longer standing entirely behind her either. "Rachel," he said under his breath, "we need to slow this down." But she did not respond to him, not really, because she could feel something closing in, something she could not see but could no longer ignore. And that made her push harder, faster. "Captain needs to be notified," she said, reaching for the intercom panel, her fingers hovering for just a second before pressing the call. And that moment, that action, felt like a line being crossed, because once the captain was involved, this would no longer stay contained. It would escalate beyond recovery. Ethan watched her do it without moving, without interrupting, because this was the moment he had been waiting for. Not the confrontation, not the accusation, but the overreach, the step too far, the decision that could not be undone. And as the intercom clicked softly, a voice responded from the cockpit, calm, distant, authoritative. "Captain Reynolds." Rachel straightened slightly, her tone shifting into professional clarity. "We have a situation in first class, passenger refusing to comply with reassignment," she said. And for a brief second, there was silence on the other end. A pause that felt longer than it was. Then the captain's voice returned, measured, controlled. "I am on my way." And just like that, the stakes rose again, but not in Rachel's favor, because now there would be another set of eyes, another layer of authority, and authority did not always align the way people expected. Ethan's phone vibrated again, a fourth signal, and this time he lifted it slightly, not to speak, not to call, just to look, the screen glowing briefly before dimming again. Confirmation, progression, inevitability. He lowered it slowly, his gaze steady as ever. And then, almost quietly, he spoke again. "Minute 5. and the words settled into the cabin like a marker, like a checkpoint everyone had just reached whether they understood it or not. Rachel turned toward him immediately, frustration breaking through now. "Stop saying that," she snapped, and that reaction alone revealed more than anything else had so far, because she was no longer dismissing him. She was reacting to him, and reaction meant influence. It meant the balance had shifted. Brian noticed it. Noah noticed it. The passengers noticed it, and Ethan, still seated, still composed, simply let it happen, because control was no longer about who was speaking the loudest. It was about who was moving the moment forward, and right now, that was not Rachel anymore. The hum of the aircraft seemed louder now, not because it had changed, but because everything else had sharpened around it. Every glance, every breath, every second stretching thinner as the situation edged closer to something irreversible. And when the cockpit door finally opened, the shift was immediate. Captain Daniel Reynolds stepped into the aisle with a calm authority that usually settled problems before they grew. Tall, composed, uniform crisp, the kind of presence that made people sit straighter without being told. But today the cabin did not settle, it watched, because this was no longer routine. This was something else, something already in motion. Rachel turned toward him quickly, relief flashing across her face like reinforcement had arrived just in time. "Captain, this passenger is refusing to comply with reassignment and disrupting the cabin," she said, her words precise, controlled, but carrying urgency underneath. Daniel's eyes moved to Ethan, not dismissive, not aggressive, just assessing, and for a moment, he did not speak. He just looked, taking in the posture, the stillness, the complete lack of agitation, and that alone created a pause, because this did not look like disruption, it looked like control. Brian stepped in slightly, his voice lower now, less certain than before. "There is some confusion with the seating log," he added, carefully, not fully contradicting Rachel but no longer reinforcing her either. Daniel nodded once, then addressed Ethan directly, his tone measured. "Sir, I need to understand what is happening here." Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. Calm, steady. "What is happening," he said, "is that your crew is trying to remove a confirmed passenger based on a system they just altered." The words were clear, direct, not emotional, and they landed with weight because they did not sound like defense. They sounded like a report. Daniel's expression shifted slightly, not visibly enough for most, but enough for those paying attention. His eyes flicked briefly toward Rachel, then to Brian, then to Noah, who was now holding his tablet higher, no longer hiding it, the evidence sitting in his hands, waiting to be acknowledged. "I scanned his pass," Noah said, voice steady now, no hesitation left. It was valid. Seat 2 Alpha, no issues, no flags, and the log changed after. Rachel stepped forward immediately, cutting in. "He is mistaken," she said, sharper than before, but the word mistaken no longer held the same power it did earlier, not with everything already said, not with the tension now visible from every angle in the cabin. Daniel raised his hand slightly, not aggressively, just enough to pause the overlap of voices. "Let me see the system," he said, and that request landed heavier than any command so far, because it was not about compliance anymore. It was about verification. Rachel hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, but that hesitation was enough, because Daniel saw it, and once seen, it could not be unseen. She handed over the tablet, her grip tighter than before. Daniel studied the screen, silent, focused, and the cabin waited, every second stretching longer than the last, because now the outcome depended on what he saw and what he chose to believe. Ethan's phone vibrated again, a fifth signal, and this time he did not look down at all. He already knew where this was going. He had seen this moment before, in different rooms, with different people. The exact point where authority had to decide whether to protect truth or protect itself, and he knew which one lasted longer. Daniel's eyes narrowed slightly as he scrolled, then paused, then scrolled again, his expression tightening just enough to show something was not aligning. He lifted his head slowly, looking first at Rachel, then at Brian, then at Noah, and finally back at Ethan. And when he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but far more serious. "This log does not look consistent," he said. And the moment those words left his mouth, the entire structure Rachel had been holding began to fracture, not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. Because once authority questioned the system, everything else had to be re-examined. Ethan exhaled slowly, not relief, not victory, just confirmation. And then, almost under his breath but clear enough to carry, he spoke again. Minute 6. And this time, no one told him to stop. The word inconsistent did not just question the system, it exposed it. And once exposed, the entire cabin shifted again, not slowly this time but all at once, like a current running through every row. Every passenger now fully engaged, fully aware that something was wrong beyond a simple seat dispute. Rachel's posture stiffened, her controls slipping in visible layers. "Captain, with respect, the system is accurate," she said quickly, but her voice no longer carried certainty. It carried defense. And that difference was unmistakable. Daniel did not respond to her immediately, his eyes returning to the tablet, scrolling again, slower now, more deliberate, as if looking for something specific, something deeper than surface entries. Brian stepped back half a pace. The shift subtle but clear, no longer aligned, no longer certain where he stood, and Noah remained still, holding his ground. Because now the truth was not just something he knew. It was something others were beginning to see. A man across the aisle spoke up, louder this time. "So you are saying his name was there, and now it is not?" And the question hung in the air, direct, unavoidable. Rachel turned toward him, frustration breaking through. "Sir, please do not interfere," she said. But the words had lost their authority, because interference was already happening. It was happening in every glance, every whisper, every raised phone capturing the moment from different angles. Ethan stood slowly then, not abruptly, not confrontational, just deliberate, his movement alone enough to quiet the remaining murmurs. Because now the center of the moment had shifted fully to him. He did not step forward. He did not close distance. He simply stood where he was, grounded, controlled. And when he spoke, his voice carried without effort, calm but undeniable. "Let me make this simple," he said, and even Daniel looked directly at him now, fully engaged. "You removed my name from that system after I was already seated." Ethan continued. "You questioned my presence, you ignored verification, and you escalated this situation based on assumption." Each sentence landed clean, precise, not rushed, not emotional, just fact layered on fact. And then he paused, just long enough for the weight of it to settle across the cabin, across the crew, across the captain standing in front of him. And when he spoke again, the tone did not change, but the meaning did. "What you did was not a mistake," he said. "It was a decision." Rachel opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first, because the structure she had been relying on was no longer holding. Daniel straightened slightly, the authority returning to him now, but different, no longer automatic, now intentional. "Sir," he said to Ethan, "I need full clarity." And that request was not a command. It was acknowledgement that something larger was unfolding, something that required more than protocol. Ethan nodded once, then reached into his pocket again, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise, pulling out a matte black card, clean, minimal, no branding, no decoration, just a name embossed in subtle lettering. He held it between two fingers for a second, then extended it toward Daniel, who took it without speaking, his eyes dropping to the surface, reading, processing, and in that exact moment, the silence in the cabin became absolute. Not a whisper, not a movement, just the low hum of the aircraft and the weight of realization beginning to form. Daniel's expression changed first, not drastically, but enough, his posture tightening, his grip on the card adjusting slightly as the meaning settled in. He looked up slowly, from the card to Ethan, then back again, as if confirming what he was seeing could not be misread. Rachel noticed it, Brian noticed it, Noah noticed it, and whatever doubt had existed before was replaced by something else now, something heavier, something final. Ethan held his gaze steady, unflinching, and then he spoke the sentence that ended the question entirely. "You are not removing a passenger," he said, his voice even, controlled, absolute. "You are standing in front of the person who signs your operational authority." And this time, there was no reaction, no argument, no interruption, just silence, because the moment had shifted completely, and everyone in that cabin felt it at the same time. The silence did not break, it deepened, stretching across the cabin like something heavy settling into place. Because what Ethan had just said was not loud, not dramatic, but it carried a weight that did not need volume to be understood, and Daniel felt it first, his posture shifting in a way that no one could mistake now. The authority he held was still there, but it had just been reframed, no longer above the moment, but inside it, accountable to it. His eyes moved once more to the card in his hand, then back to Ethan, and when he spoke, his voice was different, lower, precise, careful. "Mr. Cole," he said, and the use of the name alone sent a visible ripple through the crew. Rachel's expression tightened instantly. Brian straightened. Noah's grip on his tablet loosened slightly as the truth aligned with what he had been holding on to. Daniel continued, "I need to verify this immediately." But even as he said it, the verification had already begun somewhere beyond the cabin, because Ethan's phone vibrated again, not once, but twice in quick succession, a signal no one else could hear, but everyone could feel in the shift of his gaze. He did not check it right away. He did not rush. He simply let the moment breathe. Because the confirmation was no longer the question, it was the consequence that followed. Rachel took a step back without realizing it, her confidence dissolving into something closer to disbelief. "This is not possible," she said under her breath, but the words had no structure now, no authority, just reaction. Brian looked at Daniel, then at Ethan, then back again, caught between what he had been told and what was now unfolding in front of him. And then it happened, subtle at first, then undeniable. The crew tablets began to chime, one after another, a series of soft alerts cutting through the silence, not loud, not urgent, but synchronized, precise, intentional. Brian's device lit up first, his eyes dropping to the screen, scanning, then widening slightly as he read. Rachel's followed a second later, her hand hesitating before she looked, as if delaying it might change what was written there, but it did not. The message was already there, already delivered, already executed. Daniel's own device vibrated in his pocket, and when he checked it, the shift became final. The information was not a request, not a warning. It was a directive, immediate, system level, irreversible. Ethan finally spoke again, not to announce, not to explain, just to mark the moment as it completed. "Minute 9, he said, and this time the words did not sound like a count. They sounded like an ending. Rachel's eyes moved across her screen again, faster now, as if searching for an error, for anything that could undo what she was seeing. But the words did not change. Access revoked, status terminated, clearance withdrawn, effective immediately. Her breath caught, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough to break the composure she had held from the beginning. Brian lowered his tablet slowly, the color draining from his expression as the reality settled in. Noah did not move at all, because for him, this was not a shock. It was confirmation that truth, when it held, did not need force. It needed time. Daniel slipped the card back toward Ethan with both hands, a gesture small but significant, respect replacing assumption, authority recognizing authority. "Sir," he said quietly, "this situation has been corrected." But Ethan did not take the card right away. He looked at Rachel instead, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with clarity, the kind that comes when a moment reveals more than just a mistake. And then he reached out, took the card, and slipped it back into his pocket without a word, because everything that needed to be said had already been said, not in volume, not in argument, but in outcome. And in that cabin, at 38,000 feet, the power had not just shifted, it had been redefined. No one spoke for a moment after that, not because they were told to be quiet, but because there was nothing left to argue, nothing left to correct. The system had already done what voices could not. And in that stillness, the reality settled deeper than any confrontation ever could. Rachel stood frozen near the aisle, her tablet still in her hand, but no longer a tool, just a reminder. Her authority gone without a single raised voice. Brian remained beside her, shoulders slightly lowered. The confidence that once filled his posture replaced with something quieter, something reflective, and Noah, still holding his device, exhaled slowly, as if releasing something he had been carrying since the moment this began. Across the cabin, passengers shifted, not away from the scene, but closer in attention. because what they had just witnessed was not just an incident. It was a reversal, a complete dismantling of assumption in real time. Daniel adjusted his stance, stepping slightly to the side now, no longer between Ethan and the aisle but beside him, and that subtle movement said everything. The hierarchy had changed, not through force, but through truth, and Ethan, still composed, still grounded in the same space where this had started, looked around the cabin once, not to seek approval, not to confirm anything, but simply to acknowledge the moment for what it was. Then his gaze returned to Rachel, not harsh, not accusing, but clear, steady. Final. The problem was never the seat, he said, his voice calm, measured, carrying without effort. The problem was what you decided before you checked. And the words did not echo. They settled, because everyone in that space understood them immediately. Rachel lowered her eyes slightly, not in defeat alone, but in recognition, because what had been exposed was not just an action. It was a pattern, one that could not be defended now that it had been seen. Daniel spoke again, quieter this time, directed toward the cabin. We appreciate your patience. We will be resuming normal operations shortly. But even that sounded different, less like control, more like restoration. Ethan took his seat again, the same seat he had never left, the same space that had been questioned just minutes earlier, and now no one questioned it at all. The air shifted again, not tense, not charged, but settled, like a storm that had passed without needing to break anything to prove its strength. A passenger near the window nodded once, another lowered their phone, not because the moment was no longer important, but because it had already said everything it needed to say. Ethan leaned back slightly, his posture unchanged from the beginning, and for a second, the cabin returned to what it had been before, quiet, controlled, moving forward, but different now, because something had been seen, something had been corrected, and something had been remembered. And as the aircraft continued its path across the sky, steady at 38,000 feet, Ethan closed his eyes briefly, not to rest, but to reset, because for him, this was never about proving who he was. It was about showing what happens when truth is allowed to stand on its own. And just before the moment fully dissolved into routine, he spoke one final time, not to anyone specific, but clear enough for those closest to hear. I did not raise my voice, he said. I raised the standard. And this time, no one questioned where he belonged.